Hello and welcome everyone to our critical strategic decision-making webinar. This is the second one that we have done for all of you. So I welcome you to it. It's a chance to get together for about an hour and discuss what a couple of the instructors for Blue Card have been working on with the workshops that are taking place. This is just conversation from those to share with all of you. The next workshop is coming up at the Alan V. Brunacini Command Training Center in Phoenix, Arizona, May 22nd and 23rd. So if you want an expanded conversation on what we're talking about today, we invite you to sign up for that. There are 22 seats left, so that class is about half full. Today, our panel is going to include Chris Stewart. Chris Stewart's a lead instructor for Blue Card, also a retired deputy chief from the Phoenix Fire Department and current deputy chief of the Rio Verde Fire Department in Arizona. We also have Josh Bloom. Josh is the program manager for Blue Card, and Josh also is an active assistant chief of the Laughlin Fire Department outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And then Eric Phillips. Eric Phillips, a Blue Card lead instructor and captain on a very busy engine company in Las Vegas, Nevada. Welcome, gentlemen, and I'll turn it over to you. We are going to take questions about the last 15 minutes of the webinar. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in, and about 45 minutes in, Chris, Josh, and Eric will begin to take questions from all of you. So without further ado, here's the panel to discuss today's topic.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. As John so eloquently said in the beginning, we're here to kind of continue our conversation that's really centered around our critical thinking and strategic decision-making workshops that we've been doing. We're going to, I think, deliver our third do our third delivery starting tomorrow and the next day at the Alan Brunacini College of Knowledge in downtown Phoenix, and then as JV mentioned, our second delivery at the AVB CTC will be in May, and that one currently has open seats. The one for tomorrow and the next day sold out. Kind of very pleasantly, we found out it sold out really pretty quickly. So we're looking forward to being able to do that tomorrow. So Josh, do you want to start off with anything? You or Eric, got anything you want to start off before we get running with this thing?
No, I think just that, the first webinar we did went well, and that was a follow-up after you all were in Wilmington, and then, you were here in Cincinnati, and we had I think a great showing for the class and tons of discussion, and I'm still hearing it 6 weeks later. And I think when we talk about our profession, it lines right up with decisions and decision making, right? That we need to be intelligent and really know what we're doing and know why we're doing what we're doing, which I think is that a lot of that's what comes out of this. And the ability to have this conversation with folks about the strategic decision-making model that quite honestly could be a 4-year program if you really thought about it. We talked about it, Chris, you and I, about the critical factors thing, I think. And, there's 8 categories, but I said 8,000, there might be 80,000 critical factors, right? Every incident has a different set of factors. So, I'm excited that you guys are doing these. I'm excited that we can keep pushing these out. throw your questions out there so that we can have a discussion towards the end of this. And thank you all for doing what you do.
Awesome. Thanks for having us on again. I think it's awesome that we're still talking about decision making and what does that entail. And I think what we've learned from what we've done so far is there's a lot that goes into this. I think it's so easy for us to sit there and just have people and tell them, hey, why did you do this? Why did you do that? But we really don't ever give them the tools to make the better decisions. And I think that's kind of what we're identifying, is that it's a process, and your department has to have a process. You have to train on it, and then you got to hold them accountable. And I think that's really what we're diving into, is that decision making. But really, how are you doing that? And what does your department have for those standards that you say to make a better decision? So I look forward to it. I think it's growing, and I'm excited for where this is headed.
Well, fantastic. So we'll kind of get rolling on the topic of the day. So one of the more interesting things that I've personally learned, being a lead instructor here at Blue Card, and spending a lot of time in other agencies that, that either I'm not super familiar with, or I've never even, I know really nothing about, and then going to those places and then helping them figure out how to utilize a system. And a big portion of that is them recognizing what is changed from whatever they were doing previously, right? And sometimes it was nothing, sometimes it was some other form of homegrown incident command system, and then coming into their organization, and Blue Card coming into their organization, honestly, and then laying out a structure of how to do certain things. One of the biggest challenges I think we hear is that from the beginning, especially from the company officer level of organizations, from the very beginning, having to make a bunch of decisions on the front end is challenging, and then having to communicate a fair amount on the front end. Both of those may be very new and or different for new organizations and officers who are new maybe to this system. So kind of hearing and understanding that we're putting a lot of expectation on that first due company officer, because that first due company officer has to play the role of the IC. And because we have to have an IC from the very beginning at all of these incidents. And one of the responsibilities of that IC is recognize and understand what is going on the fireground, and then making decisions, as Eric alluded to here a minute ago, about what actually has to happen on the fireground. And that those decisions and that IC has to lead that early incident and the direction that early incident goes. And we are in this system, we are not reliant on SOP based assignments. We're reliant on decision making, assignments, and work based on the conditions and the critical factors early on in these incidents. So IC number one has this huge responsibility. We ask them to take in a lot of information, process it, spit it out into standard forms of communication, utilizing a standardized process, and that's what this strategic decision-making model actually is, and then be able to go to work. So we take that challenge and we couple it with a fire service issue that we have, in that when we experience serious issues on the fireground, maydays, serious injuries, line of duty death even, a vast majority of the time that can be tied to our position in the fireground and the conditions that are going on at the incident. So as it says here on the slide that we have up here, and which is a quote from our old boss, right? A majority of fireground LODDs occur because units are in offensive positions during defensive fire conditions. And so there's a lot of evidence that demonstrates that. So if we simply go to line of duty death reports, NIOSH line of duty death reports, and go other serious injury, serious incident reporting, we find that oftentimes that connection of where were they working, what were they doing, and what were the conditions like, were very much out of balance. So the question is were they out of balance from the very beginning? And regardless of what the conditions were, we decided to do, this certain set of things because that's just what we do. Or did something change on the fireground based on our actions or continuation or lack of water on the fire that made the conditions worse, that ended up us working in offensive, often interior positions during these defensive conditions, or conditions that changed rapidly or built up even slowly to defensive type conditions. And so how are we recognizing this? What process are we utilizing, and how are we trying to prevent it? That's a lot of what the conversation we have in this 16-hour workshop that we go through. The secondary part of that is the initial IC has the job of setting all of this up in the beginning, and then they're kind of setting the table, if you will, for IC number 2 to show up, go through that transfer of command process, assume command of the incident as IC number 2, as a strategic level IC, and then reevaluate that incident, again, utilizing a standardized process. It's the same process that we wanted the initial IC to use to figure out, okay, what's going on? Are we out of balance with our action and our conditions, or aren't we? Can I support the plan, or do I have to change or reevaluate the plan and then move forward? So I want to kind of utilize, kind of that everything I just said, I guess, is our problem statement, if you will, for today's conversations. What are the things that we can do to prevent us from being in bad situations and have bad things happen to us? And how do we focus on that? What are the critical elements to us being successful at that? Eric, you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can kind of start that off a little bit. When you talk about IC1, IC2, everything starts with that first in company officer. And you alluded to it earlier that there's a lot for us to think about and do when we first arrive to set that call up. But when you're utilizing the system and you're doing each of the steps individually, you tend to address all of those critical factors multiple times throughout the incident. So I think you got to make sure that you, for one, adopt the system, and then two, you got to make sure that you understand how to utilize it on the incident. So that first arriving company officer shows up on scene, gives that initial radar report. We got to make sure we get that 360 in, because that's given us another set of eyes on that building. I think we often make decisions based on that limited view that we initially see, and then we're so stuck to it that we're afraid to make a change later down the road. And it's always amazing to me when you look at the system, how many times we say strategy between IC1 and IC2. And I think that's because you're constantly doing the strategic decision-making model to evaluate those critical factors to make sure that we are in the right strategy there. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. We can't be afraid to make a change. We want to get it. We want to make it work. But we got to always make sure that we're doing the right thing there, and we're not afraid to make a change when those critical factors, when we get more information or updated information, we're not afraid to make that change in the incident.
Eric, we've been talking a bit about that company officer's role and how do they concentrate on, from the time the bell rings and they start hearing information, the size up starts there, and then they pull up and what they see. But you and I and a few of us have had a lot of conversation about the company officer can focus and think about those things because they've had plenty of discussion with their company about the firefighters' expectations. So I think we're early enough into this that you could talk a little bit about that. And I know that we're going to do some webinars on that. Like, how do we develop our firefighters to help the company officer so that I'm going to throw it out there. So we're really doing like crew resource management, right? You're not a lone ranger and the firemen are just doing task level stuff. They're doing their job and they're making some decisions too.
Yeah, I call it the firefighter size up. And I think it's one thing, I think we talked a lot of this components, but we really don't put a label on it, or we really don't kind of give it the attention that it needs. And what I mean by a firefighter survey or size up is that as an officer, first arriving officer, all those things that I need to do on scene, that's a lot to do. And so if you're trying to manage your firefighters, and I'll even use the word micromanage to a certain point, telling them what line to pull, where to pull it to, that's a lot to take in. And are you really able to do both things and still size up correctly the structure that you're going to. So there's a lot of things that go into that firefighter size up, and we'll do some more webinars on that. But you've got to talk about that stuff before. And I like to tell my crew, when I'm giving the size up, I'm telling everybody on the scene the incident action plan, but I'm also letting you know what we want to do. So I need them listening to the size up so they are now able to make decisions. You know, we've said it before, and I think it's worth saying again, that just because you become an officer, you don't all of a sudden start making good decisions. These firefighters from early on in the job need to be making decisions for their task. Now, they're not making decisions on the IAP, but if you're pulling a hose line, where are you doing that and what are you looking at? If you're looking at smoke, or you're reading it, just at a very basic level, they're starting to make decisions and starting to think on their own right there, that it ties together with the IAP. So firefighter size up is huge. We could talk about that for quite a while, but I think the important part to take away today is that we need to let our firefighters start thinking and giving them a tool to use it. You can take the same strategic decision-making model and apply it to their level where they are now. And I think it grows. You take your 6-month probationary firefighter is going to be thinking at one level, and at a year, they're going to ratchet it up a little bit. Your 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10-year firefighters are still making decisions on the fire ground every day. They're just looking at it because they have a little more training, education, and experience. So I think we need to start teaching our folks from early on the job how to make decisions and have it apply to them. So when they become officers, this isn't something new. They're used to making those decisions based on a model, based on a system, and they have the confidence to do that. Chris, what do you think about that?
Well, so I think the cool part of that discussion is then that when we start looking at things that prevent injury, things that prevent line of duty death, things that improve decision quality, improve common operating picture, common operating language. If we look at a system in which the task, tactical, and strategic level of a fireground incident organization is utilizing the same critical thinking process to evaluate whatever decisions they're responsible for at their level, then we have a pretty powerful system. And we have firefighters then that are prepared, willing, and able to do the good work. And it's all connected, and everybody's kind of looking at this from the same sheet of music. So if we show up and the firefighters are making decisions about critical factors based that are important to where that initial line placement goes, or where is it that they're trying to get to the interior to both put water on the fire and or maybe starting to search the most endangered areas, the most endangered spaces on the inside. That's huge. And then the strategic level boss showing up, assuming command, utilizing the same process, evaluating likely the same things at their level, at the strategic level, at an organizational, at an incident level, so that they can get multiple companies coordinated in doing those same things. And then when the incident actually gets large enough, or we have the right amount of resources, when we put true tactical level bosses in place, then they actually connect the strategic and task level way more effectively with the entire system, so that not only are the right things happening on the fire ground, working towards those tactical objectives, all clear, under control, loss stopped, but then we're doing it in the same manner. We're utilizing same language. Nobody's surprised. Nobody is thrown off base by somebody or something that somebody's actually doing, because they're utilizing a process. Now, that works fantastic on the fire ground. The only way you get there is actually exercising it effectively prior to being on the fire ground. So organizationally, departments, operations bosses primarily, and then I'm going to put they're number one, and I'm going to put the training bosses as 1A, right? Because they have to work together in establishing the expectations, and then secondarily starting to train them. And then so saying, hey, firefighters, company officers, battalion chiefs, it's division bosses, battalion chiefs, and whatever else we have in our organization that works as ICs. This is the way we're going to do things. This is the way we're going to process things. This is the way we're going to make decisions on the fireground. So this is our standard. And then turn around and say, okay, organizationally, this is the way we are going to train to this standard. And I know that at the company level and sometimes the battalion level, probably that's where some of our absolute best training actually happens, because they're the ones that are most closely connected to the work. I feel like, at least in my personal experience, the strategic level is the one that needed the more exercise than the task and tactical levels on this type of stuff. So in order to build a little bit of synergy between all those points inside of an incident organization, you have to have departmental commitment to not only the standard, but then to the training, and have it be all connected and going in the same direction, utilizing the same thing, because that is the only way then you're going to be able to measure performance actually when it happens on the fireground and say, we did a good job, and this is exactly why we did a good job here. Or, I don't know that we did such a great job there. This is exactly why I think we didn't do a great job. Here's how we can fix that. Here's how we can change that. Here's how we can do things differently in training. Or hell, if we even need to adjust the standard, we adjust the standard. So what you're talking about at the task level has to be connected to tactical and strategic level with clear expectations, clear training, and then regular, consistent monitoring the performance that's tied back to these standards, so that we're doing the same thing over and over and moving in the right direction, rather than doing the same thing over and over, not making any performance improvements or changes, and then not understanding why it's not getting any better. So so we threw up the slide here for the strategic decision making, because this is what we're talking about, right? This is that critical thinking model. This is our decision making model on the fireground that should be connected and trained on in recruit school, training academies, whatever terminology we're going to use there. It should be trained on at the task and tactical level with crews and company officers. It should be trained on at the chief officer level, whether you're doing command training and strategic level training by itself, or you're doing command training, strategic level training connected to the tactical level incident management process that we have inside of our system. So this should be kind of the fundamental process. The most critical element to that is that everybody on the fireground, from whoever starts out as the IC to the folks doing the work, need to be able to understand how and why the critical factors on the fireground are in fact the critical factors. So we need to have a little bit of understanding here about this idea of the critical factors. The critical factors are 8 very broad areas in which define potential critical areas for this incident, given the building, the conditions, what goes on in these places, and those types of things. And it's often looked at as a overly complicated process. And we have to fight every single day inside the system to keep things simple, right? That's really the only way we're successful and the only way we're supposed to function. Simple doesn't always mean easy. And so what this is designed to do is allow us to figure out actually what are the critical things, either initially or at any given point in the incident, right then and there, as they are connected to the tactical objectives, fire control, all clear, loss stopped. And so what is critical right now, and what is actually impacting or do I have to account for in figuring out what my plan of action is? Now, there's 2 steps in between that, right? We have to figure out where we are in our risk management plan. That's 100% based on our critical factors, right? Because our risk management plan, the green of our risk management plan is we'll risk a lot to save savable lives. Savable lives being that optimal term there. Well, if in our size up and on our establishment of the critical factors, life safety was not a critical factor for whatever reason we determined it was not, then should we actually be operating in the green? If we don't think we have a life safety problem, are we going to hang our asses out in a big way to do stuff that has nothing to do with savable lives? We probably shouldn't, right? So we have to start drawing connections to our critical factors, our position in the risk management plan. Those two things then drive our strategy. Are we going to be working in the hazard zone? Or are we going to be working from outside the hazard zone? And then what does that plan look like? So if the firefighters that are making decisions about stretching the lines are about sizing things up in a standard process that we discuss and practice in this workshop, then their decision about where lines are going, what space they want to occupy, how they're going to enter the structure, all those things that a captain may or may not be able to supervise every single step in that process, we're winning. If company officers are utilizing it as initial ICs, or they're utilizing it as supervising their crews, fantastic. We're another additional component that's developing synergy. And then as the strategic level ICs doing the exact same thing as they go through assuming command and then moving through how we're achieving their tactical objectives, then that makes the system even that much better. So it's a holistic approach to how we should be doing this stuff top to bottom inside the incident organization. That's a whole lot that just came out of my mouth. Eric, what do you or Josh, what can you make sense of that for them?
Oh yeah, it makes sense. So I think you said a couple things that got me thinking a little bit. First, you said, I'm gonna say it a little different. You got to keep it simple, stupid, right? The system, we work every day to keep it simple. And we do that. And it's a very simple system that allows us to have that autonomy on the fire ground for when things change or things happen to address them. So the question I'm going to pose to everybody on the webinar is, do you know how to use the system? Do you know how to use the system appropriately? Because I think when we teach this a lot, we get a lot of questions. Well, what exactly is priority traffic? When do I say this, or can I say this, or how do I do this? And as that number one IC as that working boss, it gets complicated. There's a lot going on, and you have to be able to know how to use the system appropriately to get in everything you want. Because I think sometimes people feel like, I'm rushed, there's people stacking up, everybody's coming on scene, and they get a little nervous because they don't really comfortable with the system and know how to use it. So ask yourself, do you really know how to use the system? Do you know the 4 times to get on the radio? I think that's key. When you see something that meets priority traffic, you say that. The other thing that I thought of, Chris, when you're saying that, when you're talking about the task level to tactical and strategic level, is our CAN reports. So as the number one IC, as we're out there in the field and we get asked for a CAN report from Strategic Command, how are our CAN reports? Are we honest with ourselves, and do we know the important things that we need to communicate in a CAN report? And I'll challenge everybody on here. Think about your own CAN reports. Can you get better when you're relaying that information? Is it the important, proper information, or are we really lying to the IC number 2 saying that, hey, I can get it when really we can't get it, or we don't have water on the fire and we're telling them that we're making progress and we're doing good when in reality we're not doing good inside. So I think that there's a couple things to think about is if we really know the system and how to utilize it, then we feel comfortable communicating that. And then really on the CAN reports, what are we communicating? We are the eyes for that IC inside that is making decisions from the outside, and we've got to be honest with them. We've got to know how to communicate that and be honest. So that was a few of the things that I thought about when you were talking about some of that. Josh, what do you think?
So I think, connecting the dots, and if people want to hear what it sounds like when everybody's using the system, a whole lot of the audio that we use in our podcast, has on there that first arriving company officer, that's that initial IC, giving a size up, doing a follow-up report, assigning a couple companies, and just recently they're doing fire attack. They're assigning a company to do a search for known victims. They pull some people out. It was very well organized, coordinated, and had a positive outcome. Everybody anybody listening to it anywhere in the world could have kind of tracked and kept pace with what was happening at the incident. And it went that way because the organizations that are making those things happen practice it and take it as a true profession. It's not, I'm a company officer now, and really I'm a glorified fireman. And what I really want to do is be on the nozzle and do, fireman shit. And it's like, well, no, you're in a different place. So you need to learn a different skill set. So when you learn a different skill set, you're in that position of making decisions. And, that job is more than you're just making decisions for your company. You're setting it up from the beginning. And, there's so many things out there about how it starts is how it kind of finishes, right? So if it starts shitty, trying to wrangle it back in is always a problem. But when we hear these incidents start smooth with good company officers making good decisions that are tactically sound, they're Steve Lester's, 3 C's, right? They're competent, they know what they're doing, they're confident, and they have control, right? And they're not doing it by themselves, they're doing it with the people who they're working with. Everybody who's on the response is helping them to make the decisions, whether they're standing right there by them or not, because they understand the bigger picture of the entire response, the evaluation of critical fireground factors, going through the strategic decision-making model, understand the roles, responsibilities of their firefighters, what they're going to do, what they're not going to do. They've probably laid out those expectations, and they're just going to execute that way, right? It's what we read about of the winning team. They execute very well because they practice continually, and everybody has their role and responsibility. And I think tying it all back to everybody being in this profession and making a decision and making decisions, not we're going to beat our way through everything with a sledgehammer because that's just the way we do it. And we know that doesn't work.
So I think one of the places that, maybe the most foundational place we've got to start in this whole process is actually understanding size up and developing, utilizing, training on a standard process of size up so that we're starting in the same position, that we're recognizing we have the ability to actually recognize the serious issues that are going on in front of us, right? And this is at all level of an incident organization, from the firefighters to up, right? And that then we can communicate it in a standard manner, because communication is a part of our process in a big, big way, whether we're starting with initial radio report and follow-up reports, and then utilizing CAN reports Eric was talking about for whatever reason, utilizing those tickets to get on the radio, so to speak. So how are we doing that? How are you doing that right now in your organization? Like, what is your standard for doing size up? And are you starting in the same place? And do you, or maybe the better question is do you actually have a standard, right? And if you do, then how are you exercising it? So what we're seeing is critical, and either from past experiences or current, how we're doing things today inside all of our independent organizations, right? Is there oftentimes there's a disconnect between organizational levels when working on these things. So like, I can be very comfortable and confident that company officers and their crews may be working on this, but how engage our battalion chiefs in sitting down with their individual companies and their individual crews in working on this in the same way, demonstrating the importance and the value of it, and then participating in the conversation. And then they're doing a couple things. They may actually be imparting knowledge based on experience, based on education, based on wisdom, right? To the other members that they're responsible for. But then you actually start to think about, or you start to hear, how your firefighters and how your company officers are thinking. What is important to them? What is it that they're going through? And then you're going to find out what they're insecure about. Whether it's knowledge about certain things, knowledge about construction, knowledge about fire behavior, knowledge about capabilities and capacity of fire companies, engine companies, truck companies, heavy rescue companies to do actual work on the fire ground. And then if you're a smart boss, then you're starting to listen and hear that and go, okay, I can start now tailoring our discussions and the things that we're going to teach and we're going to drill on that are directly connected to that stuff that I'm hearing them with some uncertainty about. Or they're overly confident about things because they have a misunderstanding of the way things actually should happen, and how can we address those things. So I would say organizationally, in training systems and in operation systems, establishing this as your standard, training on it formally as an organization, because what that does is that gets the information and the education and and it models what you want done out there. And then that informal training that happens in between all those other department mandated trainings, if it's done in the same way and all those elements, formally and informally, man, we're hitting a home run. It has an organic system to it. Because I promise you, at least in my experience with firefighters, and I'd like to say we had as many firefighters as the vast majority of fire departments in the nation. There's probably only a few that were larger than us in the Phoenix system, right? Especially when you combined us regionally. They want to make good decisions. They want to do good things on the fire ground. So they were willing to spend the time training beforehand because they liked the way it felt when they did it right. And it had nothing to do with the bosses saying, hey, man, you did a great job. It had everything to do with it gave them feeling that they were doing a good job. And then number two is it built credibility amongst them. They were accountable to each other, not necessarily or not just to the bosses. So ingraining that system in formal and informal process of training is simply just as simple as trying to figure out what your standard process is for determining critical factors or where we actually start with size up is hugely important, because if we don't, we tend to focus on the wrong things or the things that I just think you want me to because you never really told me what you wanted me to focus on. So Erica, I know you have a little bit of experience with that. What do you think?
I think it's awesome. I think if you look on the slide that's on the screen, the very top line, it says the system core, strategic decision-making model. And I think that system core, those two words right there, is really what drives this. You've got to make sure that when you're doing this training and you're talking about it, that you stick to this. You have this printed out when you're doing the training, and you're literally going box by box, breaking those down one at a time. And when you get to the end of it, you will be making better decisions because you went in that order. What we see when we're doing some of this training is that people want to skip a box and get ahead of themselves. And that's accidental success right there when you're not utilizing that whole system as it's presented on the screen. But this is the system core. It needs to be the department core when you're talking about making decisions, and we want people to make decisions better. When you're doing this type of training, if you look at that picture on the top right-hand side of that screen, I want you to think on all three levels: task, tactical, and strategic level. I think you could probably spend at least 30 to 45 minutes when you're looking at that picture up on the right-hand side of the screen, utilizing strategic decision-making at all three levels. Easy, a half hour, 45 minutes just talking about that one picture, because you're hitting all three levels. Your firefighters are thinking about their firefighter size up. Where are we pulling lines? Why are we doing that? Are we going to do a quick hit? All these questions start coming up. And then tactical bosses, okay, if we put one in place, where are they going? What are they doing? What kind of decisions need to be made at that tactical level? How are we utilizing the system? Communications. And then you have the strategic level. Well, how do we assign divisions? Are we doing that correctly? What does that look like? Making a decision when I need to make a division, when I don't need to make a division, what kind of resources I'm going to need. I mean, all of it gets played into it, all three levels, just based on that one picture. The other thing, Chris, too, that I think, personally found pretty awesome is at that station level, inviting the battalion chief down to do some of these sets and reps. But I'll take it one step farther. What about your neighboring stations? Have you ever had them sitting in the room with you? Because if you're running fires together every day, then I think you probably ought to be looking at this picture and have a similar idea of, you know, how you're reading this, where this fire is going, what are you going to have first and second, and things take place. So not only inviting the boss to come down and spend a little time at the station, but maybe getting a station or two together, sitting in the same room talking about fire. Hell, if we fight fire every day together, we can sure sit in a room and talk about it. I think that's probably a good place to start, because at the end of the day, like you said, everybody wants to do a good job. I truly believe that, but sometimes we're not given those tools to do it, and then we're given a tool and we're really not explained how to utilize it and what's being done. I think one other thing to point out, and I know we talk about it a lot in our trainers class, but it's this arrow between tactical priorities and critical fireground factors, and it kind of finishes that loop out. And I think that's one thing we kind of touched on it earlier, but man, just want to drive it home that this isn't one and done on the fireground. This strategic decision making is done over and over and over. Every time an assignment is made, it has a reaction for good or bad. And I think we have to evaluate that and know what our expectation is. If I start putting water on the fire, what do I expect to happen within, say, 30 to 45 seconds or a minute, or maybe 2 minutes? I would expect there to be some change. And if I'm not getting that change, then I need to reevaluate my decision. Something else is going on, and I need to start back over with the critical fireground factors because something else is going on. Or I thought, man, this is going to be a bigger fire, and it went out within 10 seconds. Okay, I need to start over. Let's make a new decision and see if we're going to keep on track or if we need to change our IAP. So I think reevaluating that and knowing that it's not a one and done on the fireground, that we're doing this, I'm going to say hundreds of times on the fireground on a good working fire. We're constantly using this model when we think about it or we don't think about it. But when we actually sit down and think about it, wow, we're using it a lot more than we think. So just a couple things that came to mind there.
Chris, while we got a few minutes, and I think on this one, since that picture's up, I think it's important that we talk about the two biggest critical factors looking at that picture, right? Life safety and the fire, I think. So, you know, what are we going to do? One, to save the most lives. Where's survivable space? Where's the fire going? And then the fire, right? Where's the fire right now? Where's the fire going? And then, Eric, you said it. We're using this 1,000 times, right? That fire is not going to look like that for very long. So it takes me right to another place as soon as those conditions start to change, right? So you guys want to talk just a little bit about, you know, one, life safety. We're in an apartment building. It's got beds in it, you know, and, you know, all clears are going to be a big priorities. But like, how far does that go? And it comes back to, Chris, something you had said, right? Who's at the biggest risk and where's the most people? Who's the biggest risk and where's the most people? So
that picture, yeah, I love that picture for a lot of different reasons, right? But if we evaluate this, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the initial arriving company officer, right? I see number one on the front end, and especially if you're going to be there for a length of time by yourself, right? And you have to know and understand how you're staffed, how you're equipped, how you're set up to be able to go to work, because you have a decision right now. Is because based on what Josh said with our critical factors here, why is that fire so critical right now? That fire is so critical right now because it's extended to it's involving all three levels of the building itself, and including impinging on that common attic, which is the place that's going to create a really big issue for us in burning the building down if we don't deal with it quickly. And then where that fire is impacting everybody's ability to escape through the natural means of egress that people typically utilize. Most people use doors, not windows, to get in and out of their apartments. Well, not everywhere, but I guess in some places. I've been some places where they'll use any way in and out of apartments. But in this instance, right? So that fire's doing that. And then you look in the windows, you've got people there, right? So we have this really, really big concern of, I have savable lives in tenable positions, or, in tenable spaces inside that. And I really, really need to deal with them. but I really, really need to deal with this fire, because if I don't deal with this fire as quickly as possible, because right now is its smallest state. If you wait 20 seconds, it's bigger and it's worse and it's involving more of the structure. So the critical factors right then there that you're clearly defining, we're understanding why. And then we have to figure out what the heck is the best thing I can do with my finite resources on the front end, especially if I'm a single engine company arriving. And can I deal with that fire? And can I deal with those victims simultaneously? And if I deal with those, if I choose to just deal with that fire, do I have the potential for us, those victims being exposed to the thermal and toxic threats for a longer period of time? Yes. And if I don't deal with getting them out of the structure as quickly as possible, they're also threatened, right? So I've got to use my critical factors to figure out what the heck I'm going to do here, and what can I do some things simultaneously? Do certain things need to take my very specific attention and focus all hands on that first company doing, or not? And so that's why I like this, because there's a tough decision here by the initial company officer. Well, maybe it shouldn't be that tough, quite honestly. It should be something that, no, I'm comfortable. I recognize what's going on here. We actually are set up to be able to do things simultaneously. And these are the things that we're going to put in play, because I recognize the critical factors on the front end. And I also use that other famous slide that we have in the blue card world of standard conditions, then standard actions creating standard outcomes, right? That's where that comes into play here. Eric, what's your thoughts?
I think you're right on there. A lot to think about on this fire, but we know one thing: we put water on the fire, everything's going to get better. The more we delay that, the worse things are going to get. So I think, times we could talk about this for a long time, but I think you hit all the points. But I think that first thing, company officer, we know it's a big building, water on the fire as quick as possible, and then getting a 360. So remember, 360, 70% of the time, it's a contributing factor. Incomplete or not doing one at all leads to a mayday. So let's see the size, extent, and location of that fire and see what we're dealing with.
All right, gentlemen. Boy, great discussion so far. We do have a couple of questions to take before we're done in about 12, 13 minutes or so. And the first question comes to us from Jake. Jake's question is, when, if ever, should first arriving company officer hand off company command and take a static position outside the structure when in offensive strategy? Maybe similar delegation that's needed when split crews. Thanks. Thanks, Jake, for that question. Guys, what do you think of that one? Start with Chris.
I think a lot about that question. So in my experience, both as a company officer, as a chief officer, going to incidents, and then my experience utilizing this system, I have yet to experience an incident where I felt like it was the best thing that an officer stayed outside and did not go to work with their crew. So making this choice, there's trade-offs, right? In any decision making, in any choice. If I think it's so crazy and so complex or challenging that I'm going to stay outside and I'm going to allow my crew to go to work in an offensive position inside the building without kind of my first responsibility of supervising my crew, I think I'm putting them at a disadvantage and overall incident at a disadvantage. If I am, but I also know at the same time is as soon as I step over that threshold from exterior to interior, I'm losing my perspective of what's going on from the building other than what I can see on the interior of the building. So what I can say is I have experience of hundreds of company officers in the system, which I grew up and worked in for 32 years, of showing up on very complex, serious issues and choosing to stay with their company and going to work, and actually being really, really effective at being IC number one, and not ever thinking, man, I wish that cat would have stayed outside from the beginning. I just don't see it as a valuable thing to do. I think the cost is too high in the supervising of your crew. And that the organization probably needs to spend time with company officers, allowing them and giving them practice at actually doing that, because I've seen folks do it very, very successfully. So that's my thought on it.
I think it comes back to the system, right? So in our system, we say strategic IC in 5 to 7 minutes. And if you don't, then you need to do something else. But, waiting from the get-go, we know that when we pass companies to somebody else, that accountability gets lost. And we know that when we have people acting in an acting role, far too many events are happening, right? When you start looking at near miss events, when you start look at the FSRI, some of those reviews, several people in acting positions, and we shouldn't be doing anything to push somebody to that acting position. If you know what I'm saying. If you rode there as the company officer, you're the company officer, and you're there to be, the company officer. And if you can't get a strategic IC in 5 to 7 minutes to be outside, then, you need to do something else. But the answer is, far too often we try to force it and just make it work. And I think, to what Eric and we all say a lot, we end up with accidental success a lot that way.
One thing that comes to mind is practice, practice, practice. Do you really know how to utilize the system, and are you comfortable doing it as that IC number one? Josh hit it on the head. BC IC number 2 is a delayed response. That's probably my one cue. He's cueing me coming to the call. That's probably the one time maybe taking a strategic command position for a delayed response. But other than that, I think practice. And I think that the more that you understand the strategic decision-making model and you're comfortable with it to where it's second nature, you will be more comfortable being inside, assigning 2 to 3, even 4 to 5 units from that interior position, because you're not having to think about exactly what you're doing, plus crew resource management, all those type of things. So the more comfortable you are with the strategic decision-making model, I think that role as that number one IC, as that working boss, becomes more comfortable, if you will. And you're more comfortable, you're more confident.
All right. Thanks, Jake, for that one. From Charles, will you explain the process for the second arriving BC when they are assigned a division or sector, the communication that takes place between IC number 2, the second BC, and the accountability engine with the passports?
Yeah, I'll start off with this one. So I was assigned to Division 3. So, I don't have that assignment. It's not my role until I'm in place. But, when I get my assignment, really, there's some transfer of command communication that happens, just like the strategic IC arriving and transferring command from the initial IC. So if Chris is a strategic IC and he assigns me Division 3, the communications that he should give me is Battalion 5, I'm going to make you Division 3. The rundown of the companies who are working there right now, for the purpose of me being able to get their passports and know who's going to be working for me when I get to that initial accountability location, which is, we'll just say, Engine 1, that's on the alpha side of the building. So I get, fully dressed. I'm listening to the radio. I go get those passports. I go to Division 3. Once I'm in place in Division 3, I can announce, okay, Battalion 5, I'm now in place. I'll be Division 3. Here's the rundown of the units that I got, and then if I have any needs. So it's basically a little transfer of command. So the other piece that the incident commander would come back either before or after is giving me a task. Already gave me a task and a location, but what my objectives are there. If there's something specific needs to be happening, like we have an all clear of, the C wing, but we still need to get an all clear of the D wing, or your biggest objective is to cut that fire off in the attic. So that process is really just like the transfer of command going from IC1 to the strategic IC, because that's what we're doing. We're passing a part of the incident off to somebody else that they're going to be responsible for that geographic area.
So I think the one thing that we've noticed, or at least I've noticed in the trainers that we've been doing, is helping the folks who are going into that role as the division boss, connecting with the crews that are actually working in the division, right? And so the way we're seeing that done, both through experience on the fireground and then in training, is that once division 3 is in place, hey, and engine 2 and engine 3 say are working on the inside, battalion 5 to engine 2 and engine 3, I'm in place, I'm assuming division 3, give me a CAN report. And then that lets them know, oh, okay, battalion 5 is now division 3. And then there's a transfer or exchange of information of what's going on there. Most importantly, do you need anything right now that allows those companies to communicate that? It ties together really, really nicely. And it's not an obtrusive, it doesn't get in the way of a lot of other traffic on the fireground.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Charles. We go to Adam's question. Adam asks, as a first due engineer, what is the best thing I can do to help support the strategic decision-making model my company officer implements, not necessarily on a tactical level?
Yeah, great question. Well, Toby, the nicest guy on the job, Reamer, saved my ass numerous times on a fire by doing this. I think when I think of your question there, what can you do to support it? Well, when you look at the critical factors, you're doing your own size up as an engineer, and that includes looking at the fire. When we talk about water supplies, you talk about looking at the size of the fire and the extent of it. How much water am I going to get? Are you staying ahead of that curve on the water supply issue of getting water to make sure we never run out? The other thing, when you're thinking about that strategic decision-making model, what can you do to help? There's been many times Toby's helped flake out the lines or help get equipment out and ready so we get water on the fire faster because we don't have a kink or we have to cut a fence or a locked gate or something along those lines. So as we talked about a firefighter size up, I truly believe that there's an engineer size up as well. And they will save your ass many times on that fireground if they're thinking as well. Everybody thinks for their specific job and what do they have to do to support the IAP of the overall incident. So quick things that I'm thinking about: water supply, getting quick water on it. Can he throw a quick hit or transitional attack water if we're cutting gates and forcible entry from 50 feet away, getting water into that building quicker? Yeah, these are all things that engineer can do, which supports the strategic decision-making model. But break that down, critical factors. What do you have to do as an engineer based on the critical factors that you see? So those are some of the things that I think about with an engineer. Man, they're priceless. I don't have anything else to say besides they save your ass a lot when they're thinking and they're trying to stay ahead based on the things that he hears me communicate either on the initial radar report or even more, the follow-up report. We got to have him listen to the radio because that follow-up report is that much more information for him to decide a lot of things that need to happen on that exterior. So
I'll just throw one thing into that is, when you duck your head and go across that threshold, Eric, Toby's still standing outside watching, right? So I think that's that engineer size up. Like, when you see something, sometimes you might need to say something because
yes,
they don't know, right? Or I think access and egress becomes a big deal, right? So many professional engineers, they know their way around better than the hydrant's at 419 East Main. And it's like, oh, it is? Like, okay, perfect. Like, so, I mean, those are all things that fit into it so that, again, you can focus on doing your job because the engineer is doing their job.
Absolutely. You're talking about ladders are getting taken off, setting out in the front yard. I mean, man, we could go into a lot of it, but wow, they play a critical role into it. And I think one thing to ask your engineers, what communication are they prepared to say that fits into the system, like priority traffic? When are some things or times that engineer would need to say priority traffic? Because there's definitely a few, like you said, Josh, and you alluded to one of them, but there's more than that. So challenge and validate that picture that we had up, that 3-story apartment. What have your engineer go through and see what he's thinking of critical factors. And if something happens there, what kind of priority traffic might he use, or different radio, the 4 tickets to get on the radio. So as a system, as a team, we all play a critical role. You've got to get together and talk about it, what each of your team members provide, because we all make decisions. You notice that everybody on the fireground makes a decision. I don't care the role that you're in. Everybody makes a decision. Man, it'd be nice to have something rock solid that you can hold on to, like the strategic decision-making model, to be able to guide us making those decisions.
One last thing here as we're running out of time with that was the wrong one. Joey had a comment earlier in. He said, a challenge I face is curbing the rush to change strategy upon the completion of a tactical objective. It is imperative that we continuously use the strategic decision-making model. The ability to seamlessly size up and assess risk should be what drives strategy. And I think that was a real useful part of the conversation you all were having today.
Yes.
All right. Well, we've just been a little over an hour. Anything that anyone would like to add before we wrap it up today on the panel?
No, thank you. If you want to do, if you want to have more conversation and actually spend some time, do some sets and reps, go through it, come to one of the decision-making workshops, right? Get yourself in there, get your organization primed on it. And we'll help, we'll do anything we can to help and talk about the system and support you in utilizing the system.
Yeah, thanks for having us and talking about this, making decisions. I think it's something we can all grow on. And as we get together in the fire service and talk about some of these challenges that we're all facing and how to get through them and how to do better, from training and everything, man, we're only going to be better every time we talk about it. So, Chris, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow down in Phoenix, and I'm looking forward to the class for the next 2 days. So thanks for having us.
Final thought, Josh?
Yeah. So if you're looking for more information on this and critical thinking and decision making, bshifter.com. If you go to the workshops drop down now, there's a whole class description there, and then some comments from some folks where we've delivered the class, their takeaways. So I'm confident that if you choose to attend one of these, that you will leave and you will feel re-energized, and I think two, you'll leave with some tools to help you make better decisions.
All right. We'd like to thank everyone who joined us today on the webinar. If you have any suggestions for us, or there's a webinar you'd like to see us do, we try to do one of these free webinars monthly. Feel free to drop any of us a line. You have our email addresses on the screen right now. And as Josh said, check out bshifter.com. Continue to read the B-Shifter Buck Slip that comes out weekly. And then check out our podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. That comes out at least every other week. And as the topics come up, even more often. Until next time, thanks so much for joining us on this webinar today. We want you all to be safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.